here we go.
Okay.
First question. Can you walk me a little bit through, say, a moment of, well, let's see. Do we want to look at action or do we want to look at uh, sort of scene by scene procedure? What you mentioned a few things that you had in mind, and I'll go with your first priority.
Okay. So I think since we spoke last, I kind of have fallen down the rabbit hole, thinking of terms of like ownership, I guess is the best way to say. It's like what parts of the story or what parts of the game individuals get to make a stake on.
Um, cool. If you don't mind me conceptualizing for a second,
Yeah.
one thing that I've been careful to split apart is who gets to make something up in the first place, but that's versus just actually uh, having being sort of the final word about it in play, because
Right.
those are two
Right.
different things. I mean, you can tell me,
Exactly.
okay, I choose that my character is from this place. Well, yeah, but I'm sort of the backstory guy, so I get to say what that means when we actually play. Um,
Right.
so if we focus on the play side of things and not on who exactly makes them up, um, then I talk about I've used the word authorities, um, but as we talked about before, it's not really the person necessarily who just goes on and on about it. It's the person who sort of has the fine. If there's dialogue or questions, that's the person we turn to. Or if there's a bunch of input, that's the person who says, "Okay, we got it. Let's go forward." That does happen. Or that's the person who says, um, for example, uh, you know, I don't know. That's something you can say, right? So anyway, but there's a person who kind of has that about different things, right? There's a different people for different things. And I think that's the most important part of it is that role playing just doesn't happen unless there is some crisscrossing of these either dialogue within an authority that someone has or a crisscrossing of authorities. A good way to look at it is that during most games in combat scenes, combat situations, it may have been said, uh, it may have been up until now, if you say I walk across the room, it doesn't happen unless I say yes in that game, say. But in the middle of the combat situation, when you say I run over there and hit them, there is no yes from me. That's your job, right? To say those kinds of actions once we're in this larger sphere of what I call an outcome authority situation. Or no, sorry, that's confusing. An outcome authority mode of play.
Right.
So
Gotcha.
we have different speaking roles, different authority distributions when we're worrying about outcomes than when we're worrying about situational run-ups to outcomes.
Mhm.
Does that make any sense? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
right. So
Yeah.
okay, go ahead. So how does this idea apply to what you were thinking about, if it does?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So, um, I, I've I've experienced this on a couple of different levels where I think, to let you know, most of the people that I play with, they have come from kind of like old school gaming background, right? So like Dungeons and Dragons and how it's set up. Play is created beforehand, and you're as a player, you're more of an interactive audience member than
Mm-hmm.
you are anything else, right? So when I
Right, a particular
right,
sort of D&D, but go on. Yeah, right.
right, yeah. So whenever we begin to play, and I give them more of a hand in story creation, right? Like they get to say more, right? They have points that they can change the narrative
Mm-hmm.
or add to the narrative outside of their character, right?
Right.
That's when things start to get like murky and muddy because then they start saying, "Well, this is my story, right? And why is it that you get to say that that's not the case?" right? So an example is that uh, in play, one of the characters, he's a mercenary. He's an ex-mercenary, and he wants this tenuous situation with the old mercenary group. So in his mind, we establish in the fiction they kind of they're dark and maybe they hang out with demons, maybe they do this, but we don't really say exactly what they've done. So we play, and in his mind, they're evil and they're just villains, and he treats them like that. And then when the other players are like, well, yeah, maybe you're the bad guy, and because how he's acted toward them versus what's in the game. And then there's this big conversation where what the other players view in the game and what's in his mind. And I try to tell him like, well, just because you keep saying they're villains doesn't make them villain. It's what happens in the game, right? And he's like, well, they're mine. They're my backstory. I created them, And
Yes.
then to make things messier, one of the other guys uses one of these points to change the fiction, where he's like, okay, one of the guys in this group is this old friend of mine. So he's like implanted his story hook into this other guy's interest in the story.
Now, I think
And
you've basically done a sort of a textbook dissection of murky aspects of this thing called authority, because as the only solution is that these have to be recognized as rules. These are rules more than how many dice do I roll to hit. I mean, these are serious rules. And as
mm,
I have said before, if you want to question whether they're rules, just sit down at a table and do it differently from the way they do it and see where it gets you.
mm,
Right. And this is a
yeah,
perfectly good example. As far as player X is concerned, there are rules for how we do these things. And if I have if I have backstory authority, the most you guys can do is suggest, and I can say yes or no. I am the consultant regarding this material. That's how it is. Um, and if, okay, this is speculation. There is a way to play, especially in the way that you're describing about some of their experiences, where, again, if you're an interactive audience member, then your character's backstory is often the only thing you have, right? The only thing. And the DM is so busy with their forward driving plot that basically they let you have it so you can say how you got involved, or you can say what you care about, or you can wax about your past, kind of in your own little role playing theater. And that way, you get to play your character, and there's something about it that you actually have authority over, because that's all you've got. You certainly don't have any about how they're participating right now and what's going to happen. Someone else is doing all that. So, of course, you're going to sink your claws into that and never let anybody mess with it. Right? It's if that's all you've got, then it's that you're gonna live or die on that. You will die on that hill.
right, right.
So the next question then is, first of all, is it that rigid? Is that just good role playing? Right? To do good role playing, you do it like this. The answer, of course, is no. I mean, there's plenty of times where I might uh, I might have come up with character backstory, and I know full well that I have handed it over, and who knows what form it's going to be in when it comes back to the table. That may be the case. There are other times when I know that there is this special funky currency in the game by which anything can be modified a little. Anything. I mean, if that's what that does in the game. And if I'm a person who feels that strongly about my character's backstory being my authority, and I feel I treasure it and modify it on my own and add paragraphs in the dead of night, and don't and really think of that as my only personal created portion of play, if that's how I look at it, then I'm going to reject all those things. I'm going to say no, I don't want to play. If that's the rules, then I will go find another table. I'm just not going to do
Right.
that. And that's at that point, it is not a matter of argumentation. We are talking about wanting to play by different rules.
Mhm.
And there is no, good or bad to play. I mean, certainly people will subjectively experience that as good or bad play because you started arguing and bitching and table flipping. And so, what are you, a bad player?
Mhm.
Right. And so that's the problem. We have to sort of get away from that and say, it's, first of all, you're not going to please everyone. But
Right.
second, if you have play in which something like those points, the story points, whatever we want to call them, if you have play in which that disrupts rather than enhances, and I don't mean just for that one person. I mean if the understanding of it all is kind of like a big rug pull, right? I mean if we understood it a certain way and, oh, by the way, here's a rug pull, that isn't fun, right? I mean we don't want procedures that pull the rug out from under people in terms of their notions of how we do this thing. Um, what are in fact those points in your mind for? Are they for uh, generating actual conflicts, or are they kind of coloring up the situation and we have to play through for a while to find out how they really work? How much situational impact those stories, those points actually have? I mean, maybe they're not supposed to. Maybe hypothetically, you could say, well, that's not that big a deal, right? I mean, I'm not taking away your character's backstory. You could be 99.9% right, and this guy is just like one totally exceptional dude, right? This not so bad guy. I mean, what, you get to be the only good guy, coming from there? Come on, can't there be someone else? I mean, I'm not. I mean that could be the idea is that spending this point, I'm not destroying your thing, but on the other hand, they could be very powerful. They could be super powerful story points. And I do get to say your thing. You've been wrong all along. Here's my story point. You had it wrong all along. Those guys were actually fighting for the right and the light and the way, and you were misled. Here, story point says so. You see, how powerful are we talking about for what that does? And if the person doesn't know that, they're going to assume the worst.
Right.
They're going to say, what? You're going to spend a story point, and my character, is suddenly, you know, I'm an elf. Why? Because they're going to think that those things are nothing but a pure Looney Tunes or stupid factor thrown into the medium.
Mhm.
Because and part of this, a lot of it has to do with, as you said, the kind of strange construction that a person may have had experience with. If they have this construction of play that you have total authority and talking power basically over everything over here, and I have it over this little island, then I'm never going to mess with anything you say, and you better not mess with anything I say about my thing, right? So there's this real segregated approach to authorities that people can develop, and so that's what I guess I'm asking you. I mean, are you using these points just as a way to kind of let a person into a little bit of the other guy's authority? I mean, or are you basically giving him like, here, you don't have it, I'll just give it to him for a few sentences, like the whole thing?
Okay. Well, how I use them is in because there are two kinds.
Mm-hmm.
One uses to establish something in the fiction.
Right.
Okay, so this is how things are, and as long pretty much how I play is as long as it's plausible.
Mm-hmm.
Like we haven't established, it doesn't contradict things or
Right.
retcon things.
Mm-hmm.
Then we tend to let it go, and it's usually usually just like a sentence, like a one sort of thing, you know. The other point um, actually moves, as I say, like moves a non-player character. You can say that this character does this thing.
Right.
All right. And you can actually even move other player characters, but they have veto power on their
Right.
characters.
Right.
And the
Uh-huh.
right. So in that way, there's a point that established something and then a point that moves a character. And
Yeah.
and the reasoning behind this is I want the players to be able to affect the world outside of just what their character does. I want them to have a little taste of,
Yeah.
oh, here's a guy, here's does this, right?
One thing that's important about this is that I find that behavior very common. And I find it common even at groups, among groups, who would swear they never do it. They would say, "Oh no, the GM does all this and that and all this and that, and I just play our characters." And the GM will say, "Oh yeah, I just play the setting. I play the world." Right? And then you'll watch
Uh,
and you'll see there's plenty of times when the GM will prompt an emotion, or that pisses you off, right? Or something like that, um or say something about what's going on with a given character, as if they were kind of playing them or establishing things about where they are internally. And then simultaneously, you will see players in that very same game do things like move inanimate objects around. That candlestick. It's got to be right there, right? And the GM never says no. I mean, in those circumstances, so you can see that the group actually has these authorities in and out of the characters' skins that are far more interactive and crisscrossing than anybody at the table ever notices or admits.
right. I
So
see that.
all this is my long intro for saying you're not doing anything weird. You're just admitting it and putting a little formalization of these points into it. Now, I really think that's really super important, because to distinguish between your two types. First
Mhm.
of all, you in the first one, when you say establish a thing, you're usually talking about the fictional situation that we're in right this minute, right? Like a thing is here, or are you talking like an
No,
object, or are you talking about the way things were and how they factor in?
it. Okay, so
Could be
a little
both.
bit about okay, yeah, a little bit about how I tend to play this game versus other games is that there's a mindset where we're in a scene doing a thing,
Right.
but then there's a part where I'll say, okay, scene's over, and then it's almost like the players. I feel like we kind of come back to like a lobby, and we'll talk about the game from of a different scope, and then say, okay, next scene, and then I establish it again. So it's not like a moment to moment, like here's this day, here's this day. It's like, okay, some ambiguous amount of time in the future. Here's the situation. Here's the setting. Here's here, just like a movie or something. We cut here and we start playing
Right.
again.
This is also pretty ordinary. So, but go on. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so when you establish something, it could be something just for the players. It doesn't have to be for the characters. So if you want to, like you can say, okay, well, this guy, this NPC is related to this guy or whatever. You can establish whatever you want in the fiction.
So we
As long as
really
it makes
are
sense.
talking about mostly backstory authority.
Well, it could be
Mostly.
here now, right?
Uh-huh.
Because like you
Mm-hmm.
could also say you're going to sneak into a place,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're like, this door is unlocked,
Right.
right? I want to spin a point
Okay.
and say this
Excellent.
door's unlocked.
So we are talking about either backstory or situational authority, um, in terms of this one way to use these story points.